What's up, guys? It's Will from the Duelists, bringing you a new video called the top 10 basically obsolete rank 4s in the game. So these are basically rank 4s that people you would routinely run as staples. But as time went by and new cards were released, these cards began to fall out of favor because their effects became basically power crept. For example, things would come out that would basically be better than the current effect of that monster, or simply extra decks would become tighter. With the advent of link monsters and things like that, extra decks became a lot tighter to where these cards could not be run. And so we're going to go and basically get into a top 10 list of generic rank 4s. Now, when I say generic, is that these cards don't necessarily say 2 warrior type monsters, 2 light type monsters, 2 aqua. These are just generic rank 4s. You can make them with any kind of level 4 monsters that were routinely run in cards and decks in the past, but unfortunately have become power crept to where they're not run routinely at all. Starting with number 10, we have Maestroke the Symphony Djinn. So this was like one of the first Xyz monsters to really come out that had like a pretty good effect. Like all the other ones were kind of meh, kind of meh, all right. But this one was pretty good, and basically the stats are kind of okay. You have 1800 attack, 2300 defense, but the primary reason why this monster was run is because of that first effect right there. Once per turn, you can detach one Xyz material from this card, then target one face-up attack position monster your opponent controls, change your face-down defensive position. This card was a Book of Moon when Book of Moon was at 1. Like, it's just a simple thing like that. Like, this card was a Book of Moon. And the things that make Lavolval Chain, Maestroke, other things. We could say, Maestroke, Lavolval Chain. We can say Evolves Alagia. The things that make them great is because, yeah, you have Solemn Judgment. Yeah, you have Foolish Burial. Yeah, you have Book of Moon all at 1. Whereas an extra deck monster, you don't have to draw that card. As long as you can get 2 level 4 monsters on hand, you have a Book of Moon in Maestroke, a once per turn Book of Moon. So the fact that this card was a Book of Moon made this card completely routinely run in a lot of decks. Now, unfortunately, the card, even though it's still, Book of Moon is still a good effect nowadays, people don't really even run Book of Moon in the main deck anymore. And so, is this card kind of worth running nowadays? No, because we've had more rank 4s come out that have just had immensely better effect, and 2, Book of Mooning nowadays isn't necessarily that great, especially since Link monsters can't even get flipped face down. So, unfortunately, the card was a great card when it first came out. Over time, though, it just got power crept. There are too many rank 4s that did way more than this card to where it just kind of got power crept and left on the side. So that brings us to number 9. Number 9 is number 103, Ragnazero. Now, Ragnazero was kind of a unique example of a during either player's turn effect. It says once per turn during either player's turn, you can detach what exceeds material from this card, then target one face-up return monster whose basically attack is like different than its original attack. You get to destroy it, and you get to draw a card. So this card, like I said, back in the day, rank like that doesn't the effect's not that good. The effects is pretty garbage nowadays. Like maybe if you're running it in like I don't know, dinosaurs if you're running like the field spell, but like this card, like rank 4s back in the day didn't have the kind of effects that we have now, like Baguska and stuff like that. It's to where this card was routinely run. Like for one, it pretty much introduced the wow, we have a rank 4 that does something during either player's turn. That's pretty good. And then 2, it also lets you draw cards. So basically, you can think of it as a +1. Like, yeah, you invest 2 level 4s to run it, but basically you get to destroy a card during your opponent's turn, and you get to draw cards. So you get to replenish the resources. And so this card did routinely see play in a lot of decks. It was a staple rank 4, but it got power crept very, very fast, and it became routinely run in decks in which, you can actually play it at strengths, which a lot of the decks nowadays don't really do. So, essentially, though, it did have a presence, so I had to put it on here because Ragnazero, I'm pretty sure nobody runs Ragnazero anymore, just like nobody runs Maestroke, but it was a card that was seeing play for some time. And that actually brings us to number 8, Traptrix Rafflesia. Or Rafflesia, how do you pronounce that basically? But so Traptrix Rafflesia, when it came out, it was routinely run in decks like ABC and Pepe. Why? Is because it basically was any kind of trap hole from your deck. You could use Floodgate Trap Hole. You could use Trap Hole, Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare. You could use Bottomless Trap Hole. Traptrix Rafflesia was basically Maestroke, except during either player's turn, and you can do a lot of various other things. You could flip them face down, you could banish them, you can negate them if they activate an effect, if they were a special summon, you could shuffle them back in the deck if you were running time space. Like, you had basically every access to every one of those cards. And ABC players and Pepe players were running Traptrix Rafflesia because it gave that ability. And on top of that, it was also immune to trap cards. So Solemn Strikes and Paleozoic players would have a tough time trying to establish board presence, trying to get a toad on the board, because Traptrix Rafflesia wouldn't get hit by their trap cards. So, although it's not necessarily super generic, yeah, it still requires you to run the whole cards. It did see some meta play for the short amount of time in which trap cards became, like I said, now trap cards are kind of becoming a little bit more obsolete. They are a little bit slower, and we have things like hand traps, including traps that can activate from the hand like directly anyway, to where Traptrix Rafflesia is a good card, but you're really not going to ever really see it run anymore unless the deck, for multiple reasons. One, trap cards aren't being run that much anymore. Two, Baguska. Like, Baguska changed the dynamics of rank 4s, I think, in my opinion, like, like, if that is a definition of power creep, because a lot of these cards that will be on this list are a direct result of Baguska being made, and I think Traptrix Rafflesia is one reason. If you have a Baguska, you don't need to really run the Rafflesia, and you don't have to invest those trap cards into your main deck because you have a Baguska, and that's one reason why I think Traptrix Rafflesia has made this list. So yeah. Okay, so that brings us to number 7. Number 50, Blackship of Corn. So, like, yes, this also at one point used to be a generic rank 4 staple. And not necessarily for the second effect, but for the first effect. It's basically once per turn you can detach one Xyz material from this card, then target one face-up card your opponent controls with attack less than or equal to this card. Send it to the graveyard. So, essentially, this card, it targeted, which unfortunately, targeting is also becoming less and less. You know, basically, if a card, I remember there was one format in which if you targeted, period, you were considered a bad card. But this card was unique in that it sent to the graveyard. It didn't destroy. It didn't do, because a lot of cards and a lot of effects were indestructible by card effects. Or when you would destroy it, it would basically activate in the graveyard and do some kind of stuff. Whereas this card, although it targeted, it sent them to the graveyard. And so people would always like to have at least one Blackship of Corn in their extra deck in the event that they didn't want their opponent's stuff to trigger in the graveyard, or their opponents had like an indestructible effect. The fact that it could send it to the graveyard was just pretty good. Now, why is this card routinely run today? Well, because Castel. Castel, honestly, is another reason, aside from Baguska, of which cards on this list are unfortunately not run anymore, because Castel does what this card does and more. Castel hits continuous spells and traps, it hits field spells, it hits monsters, and it shuffles them back in the deck. It eludes the whole destroying effect anyway. So Castel is the reason why, and Castel is a Book of Moon too. So like Castel, that's the reason why Castel is also a reason why Maestroke's not run anymore, because you can basically do more with Castel than you can do with Maestroke. But in other words, with Blackship of Corn, Castel, you can hit more things with Castel, which makes it more versatile, which is why Blackship of Corn is not necessarily run anymore. Okay. Now we get to number 6, Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon. So Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon was a good generic rank 4 because it had the ability to not only beef up a monster, but also to get over problem monsters with high attack. Basically, when you're building a rank 4 extra deck, you want to be able to hit as much spectrum as possible. In other words, if I have an Abyss Dweller, okay, that takes care of graveyards. If I have a Tornado Dragon, that takes care of spells and traps. Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon is like, okay, if I'm confronting against a monster with really, really high attack, Dark Rebellion Xyz monster is my out. So basically, it's basically 2 level 4 monsters. You can detach 2 Xyz material, then target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls. Its attack becomes half its current attack, and this card gains the attack. So it's basically a Ryoku in one Xyz monster. The card is still good. For one, it targets, and yeah, you can say, yeah, it targets, stuff like that. But so why do they not run this anymore? Because Utopia the Lightning exists. Essentially, a lot of the reason why these cards are not run anymore is because a better version has come out. You could say the same about Heroic Challenger Excalibur, but that was basically not a generic rank 4. But the reason why nobody runs Excalibur and the reason why nobody runs Dark Rebellion Exceeds Dragon anymore is because when they're thinking of the rank 4 spot in their extra deck for taking up a big monster, they think of Utopia the Lightning. Why do they think of Utopia the Lightning? Because Utopia the Lightning can become 5,000 attack. That's probably you would have to have, like, even if you have a 4,000 monster, this monster, Dark Rebellion, is not going to become 5,000 attack. You'd have to have a monster with 5,000 attack for him to even get to 5,000 attack. On top of that, Utopia the Lightning has the advantage of your opponent cannot activate any card effects when they attack. So basically, when Utopia attacks, you can't activate Mirror Forces, you can't activate any kind of trap cards that might be in the battle phase. Whereas if Dark Rebellion Exceeds Dragon were to have a monster's attack and attack, he could be vulnerable to Mirror Force and stuff like that. So basically what happens is that, yes, this card, unfortunately, the fact that it targets, one, is the reason why it's not being run, but two, Utopia the Lightning is just a so much better of card. Now granted, yes, Utopia the Lightning, you have to run 2 cards in your extra deck. You have to run Utopia and Utopia the Lightning. But at the end of the day, Utopia the Lightning is easily, well, even though I know it's not a rank 4, it's technical, but basically, yeah, it's a rank 4 staple. And nobody's going to run Dark Rebellion Exceeds Dragon if Utopia the Lightning is running out there. So that's basically why it reaches number 6. All right, so now we get to number 5, number 106, Giant Hand. Not a bad card. It was a generic rank 4. It was a prize card for like ever. Like, in other words, you had to have won an event for be able to get one, and then it finally came out in gold rare. But basically, if people had access to Giant number 106, it would be a rank 4 staple. And the reason why is because basically during either player's turn when a monster effect is activated on your opponent's side of the field, you can detach 2 excuse material, then target 1 effect monster your opponent controls, and basically it has its effects negated. It's basically a breakthrough skill with basically a monster format is basically what this card is. And so basically, like, any card that you look at and you evaluate to see whether it's good is you basically see, okay, how can this be beneficial during my turn? And then also on the flip side, how can this screw up my opponent's turn? And the beneficial thing about number 106 Giant Hand is that, yeah, it could basically negate a monster effect during your opponent's turn. The only drawback that I had about it, and another reason why in which I don't particularly think the card is running much money more, is that you had to do it in response to an activation. So if your opponent already controlled something like that, you couldn't detach materials to negate it. It had to be in response to an activation, which is one drawback of number 106. But the reason why it was routinely run for anybody who had access to it is because, yeah, during either player's turn, I get to negate a monster effect, which is pretty good. Now, why is this card not necessarily run anymore? Well, because a lot of cards, Baguska. Baguska stops activations of any effects. So why run a number 106 Giant Hand if I have a Baguska? It just makes no sense to run one. On top of that, people are also picking different rank 4s for different reasons. Rafflesia. I would actually run Rafflesia over Giant Hand, but then again, you'd also have to run the Black Trap Hole cards and things like that. So, like I said, the reason why number 106 it was a good card at the time. Its drawbacks is that you have to do it in responsive activation, and then why is it not being run anymore? Because Baguska. Anybody's going to select Baguska over number 106 Giant Hand, unfortunately. But it did see some time in play. It was rank 4 stable at one time, which is why it reached number 5. And that brings us to number 4, number 82, Heartland Draco. So basically, this card was a detach 1 exceeds material. You get to attack directly. And then on top of that, if you had a continuous spell or something like that, it could not be targeted for attacks. So basically, why was this card a staple? If you had your opponent less than 2,000 life points, it was a good idea to just be able to have this card in your extra deck, but to where even if they have like a big Blue Eyes White Dragon or a big beefy monster or something like that, you could just attack over them directly for game, which is pretty good. Now, on top of that, why is this card not run routinely much anymore? To be honest, the card is still not terrible. I think it's not necessarily that something's replaced it. You could argue Utopia the Lightning, but two, it's just that the card, there's just no space for it anymore. Like when you think of staple rank 4s, you think of Abysswell, you think of Castel, you think of Baguska, you think of Tornado Dragon. That list adds up to where eventually you get to like maybe 10 cards and you have to allocate some resources to link cards or synchros or anything like that. So there's just no space. the effect does not, unfortunately, outweigh justification for putting it in your extra deck when there are just so many more rank 4s with like a broad diversity of like what they stop. Basically, when you're making a rank 4 extra deck, you want to be able to allocate things in it that are going to stop a variety of decks. In other words, so that you have an Abyss Dweller for when you face Burning Abyss or True Draco. You want to have Tornado Dragon for when you're facing ABC or something like that. You want to have Baguska when you're facing like any deck. You want to have basically extra deck monsters that are going to hit various things to where Heartland Draco doesn't necessarily hit anything. To where, which would you rather have? I would rather have an Abyss Dweller that can hit other decks immensely, rather than a Heartland Draco that's going to be situationally good for me. So unfortunately, Heartland Draco has unfortunately been power crept. It's not necessarily running any rank 4 decks anymore. You won't see a list running Heartland Draco, seriously. It's just simply because the effect, although good, doesn't justify running it over other rank 4s with just immensely better effects. All right, so that brings us to number 3, another prime example of pure power creep. And I've never really actually thought Diamond Direwolf is a good card, but a lot of people would regard this as one of the biggest rank 4 staples. So basically, it's 2 level 4 monsters once per turn during either player, or not during either player's turn. You can basically detach one Exceeds material, then target one Beast, Beast Warrior, or Wing Beast type monster you control, and one other card your opponent controls, destroy them. So a lot of people would just target itself, unless they're actually using it in terms of like another deck that like works with it, stuff like that. But basically, this card would be utilized as like an MST if you just needed like an MST for game or to like pop a monster or something like that. Basically, this card was like, oh, Diamond Direwolf can pop monsters and it can pop spells and traps, so why not run it? Yes, and like when we talk about rank 4s, yeah, we want rank 4s that are going to stop graveyards, we want rank 4s that are going to stop back row, we want rank 4s that are going to stop monsters. This card does too, to where you're like, oh, well, Diamond Dire hits like both spells and traps and monsters, we should run it. No, because 1, you have a Castel to take care of that for you, and 2, you have Tornado Dragon. Like, the only advantage Diamond Direwolf had over a card like Castel was that it could also hit back row. Like face down back row, which as Castel can only hit face up back row. But ever since the advent of Tornado Dragon, it's just become power creep. Why? Because like we said, during either player's turn, also kind of goes into the thinking process of whether a card is good. Diamond Direwolf can hit back row during either player's turn, and you don't even lose a monster. Whereas with Diamond Direwolf, you had to pop Diamond Direwolf to pop a back row. Tornado Dragon basically can just detach a material and take care of that back row for you. Like, Tornado Dragon was the epitome of power creep for this card, and that's why this card is not routinely run anymore. The only exception I can think of, maybe, of when anybody who would ever want to run this card is ABC, because it gets both A and B and C into the graveyard immediately. But I still think that any ABC player would probably run Tornado Dragon over Diamond Direwolf for this reason, and for that reason, Diamond Direwolf, unfortunately, has been power crept. Nobody's running this card anymore. It's not doing anything anymore. And it's because Tornado Dragon is basically taking its place. And that brings us to number 2. Everybody knows Gagaga Cowboy. Everybody knows Cowboy for game. Nobody would even use that first effect. It was all about the second effect. Basically, if you got your opponent under 800 or less, you would summon Cowboy for game, blah, blah, blah. Why is this card not being routinely run anymore? Nothing's necessarily doing anything else about... In other words, I would say that Gagaga Cowboy has gotten power crept, not because something's come out that does what it does better, because nothing does. Like, in other words, Heartland Draco, you have to actually declare an attack, whereas Gagaga Cowboy, it's just basically detached. That's 800 burn damage, I win. The reason why Gagaga Cowboy is not routinely run anymore is that there are just too many rank 4s that I'd rather have in my extra deck rather than Cowboy. In other words, if you gave me an example like, oh, Will, I want you have 3 slots left for your extra deck. You have Abyss Dweller, you have Castel, you have Baguska, you also have Gagaga Cowboy. If you ask me which 3 of those monsters I'm going to allocate to those free 3 spots, I'm going to say Castel, Baguska, and Dweller. I'm not going to run Gagaga Cowboy because they don't, Gagaga Cowboy unfortunately just doesn't hit anything. It doesn't hit back row. It doesn't stop monster effects. It doesn't stop graveyard effects. It doesn't stop any of that. All it does is a convenient 800 burn damage when I've already won game. And this card was run when you actually had that kind of extra deck space, because you're basically like, all right, I got all the staple rank 4s. Now let's add in like 4 or 5 like situationally good cards, kind of like Heartland Draco. But now the game has just evolved so much to where you don't have that kind of space in your extra deck, unfortunately, anymore. And there are so many more rank 4s that you'd rather have other than Gagaga Cowboy. Basically, if I'm ever under 800 life points or anything like that, I know I never even think about Gagaga Cowboy anymore because nobody even runs this card anymore. So that's pretty much the reason why Gagaga Cowboy's found its way out. It's because, unfortunately, its effect has gotten less good over time, and there are just so many other cards that you'd rather have instead of Gagaga Cowboy in your extra deck. And so finally, we go to our number 1 most obsolete rank 4 monster that is generic, and that is none other than number 101, Silent Honor ARK. This card was the rank 4 monster. Like, if you had access to rank 4s, you were running Silent Honor ARK, because this card just outed all of your problem monsters and gave itself protection. So basically, you detach 2 materials, then you target 1 face-up special summon attack monster your opponent controls, and you attach it to this monster as material, and if this monster would be destroyed, you could detach that material instead. So this outed BLS. It outed basically Beals. It outed so many problem monsters, and on top of that, it gave itself protection effect. So we already talked about how it, eliminates problem monsters. Why is this card not run routinely anymore? Because Castel exists. Like I said, the thing that's going to make you consider to be a good rank 4 monster when it comes to making it into an extra deck, it matters how much you hit. Silent Honor ARK, regardless of how good it is, only hits monsters. Castel can hit monsters and spells and traps, essentially. And on top of that, it shuffles them back into the deck and stuff like that, whereas this one takes as material, which could be, Castel doesn't have necessarily that destruction effect, but when you basically tip the scales, which would you rather have? A thing that's going to out monsters or a thing that's going to out monsters and spells and traps? You're going to take Castel. And unfortunately, there was a point in time where you had the ability to run both Castel and Silent Honor ARK, but like I said, more and more rank 4 monsters became released that were just better, like Tornado Dragon, like Baguskach, where unfortunately Silent Honor ARK's effect became not only power cracked, but also just kind of pushed out by all the other monsters that came out with just better effects. So I still love this card. I loved the art of this card. I ran Silent Honor ARK for a long time until I eventually realized that the card, unfortunately, I just don't have room for it anymore. Its effect is good, but Castel does it better. So if I'm going to allocate a spot to my extra deck that's really, really tight enough as it is, I'm going to allocate it to Castel and not to Silent Honor ARK. So that's that's the top 10, guys. Like, let me know what your comments, what you think about the list, or if I, have any honorable mentions that I didn't particularly mention. And then if you guys have a recommendation on another top 10 you would like to see in the future, just leave that in the comments. We'll probably get to them at some time, but hopefully you guys enjoy this one. I'll probably follow up with my top 10 best rank 4 monsters of all time. If you guys are interested in seeing that, just let me know. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and see you on the next video. Have an amazing day.